what we looked at in the first presentation. The everlasting gospel is a three-step testing process. We've seen that in the book of Revelation, the book of John, and the book of Acts. We already understand as a people that the third angel is tied in to a historical prophetic event, National Sunday Law. What there isn't clarity on is the first and the second angel and how they come into history at the end of the world. The everlasting gospel is a message of sin, righteousness, and judgment. If you do not accept the first angel's message, if you reject this, you cannot be benefited by the second angel, and therefore you will fall. This is not just on an individual level, but this happens at a prophetic level, at a historical level. You need to be wide awake to the events that are occurring around you, filter those events through inspiration to understand what they are and how to interpret them correctly, and then you're required to order your life appropriately. If you do not do that, you will fail the test that God has graciously given you so that you're able to stand in the last days, and you will be eternally lost. If you find that a struggle to believe, just go back to your existing understanding of the third angel. No matter how righteous your individual walk is with God, if you worship Him on Sunday, when that test happens, the test hasn't come yet, but when it happens, if you're worshiping on the wrong day, you will fail and you will be eternally lost. We understand that. What we don't understand is how we deal with the first and second angel's message, which is what we're dealing with. We started looking at the rest, the refreshing, or the latter rain. We saw that it was a message. And that this message is given line upon line. And that line upon line understanding is typified by drawing prophetic events along a line. Because we read that prophecy was seen to be a delineation of events. A delineation of events. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to delineate these lines. And when we read line upon line, precept upon precept, we should understand that we're required to go through inspiration and understand what it's teaching us, line upon line, here a little, there a little, and bring those prophetic stories, lay them upon a line so that we can have clarity of what those historical prophetic stories are teaching us. And if we do it correctly, as we're counseled to, in order, those histories will avail to us and unlock their secrets so that we might be able to stand in these last days. So, a question that often arises is this information salvational? Is this information salvational? So, my initial response to that would be, if this is the everlasting gospel, the answer is obvious. That if it's the gospel that we're dealing with, then it is a salvational message. So I'm just going to read Early Writings, page 188. Early Writings, page 188. Those who have had no experience in the first and second angel's messages must receive them from others who had an experience and followed down through the messages. Just want to stop there. Ellen White is obviously talking about a period that is post this Millerite history over here, where she's begun her prophetic ministry, and she's saying when people come into the church and didn't experience 1798 and the second and then the third, if they never experienced that, and now they're under the proclamation of the third, we read that earlier, we're now under the third angel's message. I'll explain that clearer as we go on. They are required to accept the truth or the information from those who experienced it. I'll read it again. Those who have had no experience in the first and second angel's messages must receive them from others who had an experience and follow down through the messages. It's Early Writings 188. So if you haven't experienced this, if you haven't personally gone through it, then you're required to accept that and to see and understand that from people who have. That's what she's saying. By the end of today, hopefully we will see, when we make application here of this history, bring it into our own history, I'm going to suggest to you, hopefully you'll see yourselves, that many of you have not experienced the first and second angel's message. You haven't experienced it. I don't mean in your individual devotional life that you recognise you're a sinner and that you're having a righteous walk with God. I'm talking about as a historical prophetic event. Most of the church have not experienced that because they haven't seen it, they haven't internalised it and recognised it as so. So they wouldn't have gone through that experience. So now you find yourselves, like Elisha, who God has been working on just before the final crisis, in preparation to do a great work, that you need to be taught the first and second angel's message in preparation for the third angel's message. Preparation for this. So that's what we're doing today. I'm here to try and explain to you what the first and second angels is, because many of you, as Ellen White spoke in that statement that we just read, haven't experienced it as some others who have. Do people understand what I'm trying to say now? Yeah? I'll read the verse on. I'll read the passage. As Jesus was rejected, if you reject Jesus, is that a salvational message? Yes. It's an issue of salvation if you reject him. As Jesus was rejected, so I saw that these messages have been rejected. And as the disciples declared that there is salvation in no other name under heaven given among men, so also should the servants of God faithfully and fearlessly warn those who embrace but a part of the truth connected with the third message, that they must gladly receive all the messages as God has given them, or have no part in the matter. So she's really clearly telling you a rejection of Jesus is a salvational issue. And she compares the rejection of Jesus with the rejection of, she said, these messages. And what are the messages she's referring to? The first and second angel's message, because they're already under the proclamation of the third. So if you reject the first and second angel's message and only accept a part, I'll read it again, that they must gladly receive all the messages God has given them, or have no part in the matter. And whether or not you recognise you have a part in the matter is irrelevant, because God recognises that you don't have any part in the matter. I want to say that in plain English if you didn't understand what she was saying. The first, second and third angel's messages are not merely a personal experience that you have in your own walk with God. They refer to historical, prophetic events. If you didn't go through those events, and most of you have not gone through these events. If you didn't, I don't mean you weren't alive at the time, but you haven't had an experience in them. then you're required to take the testimony of those who have and accept it. Because if you only accept a part of the everlasting gospel, and what part as Seventh-day Adventists are we all going to accept? What part of the everlasting gospel are we all claiming that we're going to accept? This one here, the third angel. It's in our name. It's locked into our name. It's in our psyche. Everyone here will profess that they are going to have a part of this part of the everlasting gospel without having an understanding of the first two. And if you don't have an acceptance of these two messages, you don't have a part in any of it. In plain English, whatever you might think now, if you don't understand what went on here, the histories and the prophetic fulfillment of those histories that occurred in this time period here, you will fail this test. You will fail this test, however strong you think you are. Look at the testimony of Peter when Christ warned him and he thought he would be able to stand. So we're here. Desire of Ages 2, 3, 4. Desire of Ages 2, 3, 4. As the messages of Christ's first advent announced the kingdom of his grace, so the message of his second advent announces the kingdom of his glory. And the second message, like the first, is based on the prophecies. The words of the angel to Daniel relating to the last days were to be understood in the time of the end. At that time, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. The wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Obviously I've just quoted there from Daniel 12, verses 4 and 10. It's from Desire of Ages 2, 3, 4. I want us to understand just what Daniel is saying in those two verses. He marks the wise and the wicked, and he marks an increase of knowledge and a running to and fro. You know, we're supposed to be men and not children. So when we childishly say that this running to and fro, an increase of knowledge, has got anything to do with technology or cars or transportation, we do a disservice to God. This information that's been related to us is all to do with an increase of knowledge on the books of Daniel and Revelation, because God is going to open up the truths that are locked in these scriptures. We read earlier a statement that no other message had ever been given prior to 1798. No other message had ever been given. That the hour of his judgment had come. Nobody had ever preached that before. And there was an increase of knowledge about the judgment that was about to happen. So we're all familiar with that. It's related to Daniel 8:14. To 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And the wicked are not people who are not Christians, who reject God, or the atheists. That's not what this is talking about. These wicked people here are those who refuse to listen to the increase of knowledge. It's specifically related to an understanding of the books of Daniel and Revelation. That's what the definition in these verses is of who is the wise and who are the wicked. It's not talking about your personal moral standing before God. It's talking about how you relate to these historical, prophetic events, whatever you may profess in your personal walk. We've dealt with the first angel's message here at the time of the end. We read from Great Controversy, 1888 edition, 389. That's GC 88389. GC 88389. The second angel's message of Revelation 14 was first preached in the summer of 1844. That's the first time ever it was preached. It wasn't preached in the time of Christ or the time of Reformation. It was first preached in the summer of 1844, and it then had a more direct application to the churches of the United States, where the warning of the judgment had been most widely proclaimed and most generally rejected, and where the declension in the churches had been most rapid. But the message of the second angel did not reach its complete fulfillment in 1844. I'll just stop there. Let me put it on the board. We've just read that the second angel's message was first preached in the summer of 1844. And then we read that it didn't reach its complete fulfillment. That means it didn't reach its climax when it was first preached here. Does that make sense? That's all she's saying. First preached here, and it didn't reach its climax. We're going to explain what that means. The churches then experienced a moral fall in consequence of their refusal of the light of the Advent message. But that fall was not complete. As they have continued to reject the special truths of this time, they have fallen lower and lower. Not yet, however, can it be said that Babylon is fallen, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. She has not yet made all nations do this. The spirit of world conforming and indifference to the testing truth for our time exists, and has been gaining ground in churches of the Protestant faith in all the countries of Christendom, and these churches are included in the solemn and terrible denunciation of the second angel, but the work of apostasy has not reached its culmination. The Bible declares that before the coming of the Lord, Satan will work with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness, and they that receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved, will be left to receive strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. Not until this condition shall be reached, and the union of church with the world shall be fully accomplished throughout Christendom, will the fall of Babylon be complete. The change is a progressive one, and the perfect fulfillment of Revelation 14 verse 8 is yet future. So there was a partial fulfillment here, and its climax, or its complete fulfillment, is yet a future event when Ellen White wrote this. That makes sense? So we've located the first angel and the second angel's message. And we read here that when this was given, who was it targeted at? It was targeted at the Protestant churches, and specifically the Protestant churches in which country? In the United States. So this is a message that's targeted at Protestant America, and it occurred in the summer of 1844. We're just going to look at the third angel. As the ministration of Jesus closed in the holy place, and he passed into the holiest and stood before the ark containing the law of God, he sent another mighty angel with a third message to the world. A parchment was placed in the angel's hand, and as he descended to the earth in power and majesty, he proclaimed a fearful warning, with the most terrible threatening ever born to man, said the angel, they will be brought into the close combat with the beast and his image. The third angel closes his message thus: there is the patience of the saints, here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. As he repeated these words, he pointed to the heavenly sanctuary. The minds of all who embrace this message are directed to the most holy place, where Jesus stands before the ark, making his final intercession. So we're dealing with the third angel's message now. And what is the third angel's message we've just read connected to? It's all connected to the sanctuary. The message that I am teaching is centered and anchored in the sanctuary message. This is the message about the sanctuary, because it's only through the sanctuary that you can receive salvation. There is no other way. The sanctuary service takes you through the everlasting gospel, a 3-step testing process. For those of you who want to see it this way, the courtyard, the holy place, and the most holy place. It's not a coincidence that when the third angel arrives, and we'll read it in a moment, because we're going to place this in the autumn of 1844, that Christ moves from the holy place to the most holy place. The work goes from the second to the third angel. After Jesus opened the door of the most holy, the light of the Sabbath was seen, and the people of God were tested, as his children of Israel were tested anciently, to see if they would keep God's law. I saw the third angel pointing upward, showing the disappointed ones the way to the holiest of the heavenly sanctuary. As they by faith enter the most holy, they find Jesus, and hope and joy spring up anew. I saw them looking back, reviewing the past, from the proclamation of the second advent of Jesus down to their experiences to the passing of the time in 1844. They see their disappointment explained, and joy certainly again animate them. The third angel has lighted up the past, the present and the future, and they know that God has indeed led them by his mysterious providence. So this occurs in the autumn of 1844. And it says, when they were here and they looked back, they could see the experience that they went through of the first and second angel. And they saw that God had led them. If God hasn't led you through this first and second angel's message, as we read there, you need to take the testimony of those who have experienced it. Obviously test it for yourself to see if it's true, but accept it. Counsels on Health, 357. Counsels on Health, 357. The third angel's message, embracing the messages of the first and second angels, is the message for this time. We are to raise aloft the banner on which is inscribed the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. The world is soon to meet the great lawgiver over his broken law. This is not the time to put out of sight the great issues before us. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy, the Sabbath was given to the world, that man might ever remember that in 6 days God created the world. He rested upon the seventh day, blessing it as the day of his rest, and gave it to the beings he had created, that they might remember him as the true and living God. We've looked at the first, second and third angel's message, and this delineation of events, this message is Millerite history. And the reason why that's important to us is because when Ellen White talks about this history, frames it around Matthew 25. She frames it around Matthew 25. We're all familiar with Matthew 25. Just going to read from Review and Herald, chapter 535. Give you the date for it. Review and Herald, August 19th, 1890. Review and Herald, August 19th, 1890. When the third angel's message is preached as it should be, power attends its proclamation, and it becomes an abiding influence. It must be attended with divine power, or it will accomplish nothing. Did you get the reference? Or? Okay. I have often referred to the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of whom were wise and 5 foolish. So she's connecting the parable of the 10 virgins with the third angel's message. But not only is she connecting it with the third angel's message, she's connecting it in a very specific way. She says, when the third angel's message is preached as it should be, power attends its proclamation. So you can see that there is a way to preach the third angel's message that doesn't have power. That doesn't have power. There's a way to preach the everlasting gospel that doesn't have power. What I mean by that is that before 1798, all Christendom were teaching that Christ is about to return. But Paul had counselled them very strongly not to expect his coming until the falling away of the man of sin, which occurred in 1798 when the deadly wound was given to him. So prior to that, the message of the judgment hour did not have power because nobody knew when it was going to happen. Everybody was expecting it, but nobody had any idea when it could happen. It could happen centuries into the future or tomorrow. So it didn't have a power that attended it. But in 1798, when the message of Daniel 8:14 began to be given, the message had a power. We read that no other message had been given before this. So suddenly the message now has power. And this is what Ellen White is referring to here when she says, the third angel's message is preached as it should be, power attends its proclamation. We know that the third angel's message began in 1844 and has been running through history since then. And what is that message teaching God's people? What is it teaching the world? That sometime in the future, the mark of the beast is going to come upon the world, and God's people are going to have to make a stand on whether they're going to keep Sunday or Sabbath sacred. But not only God's people, but all the world. But it does happen in order. First the church, then the world. Because judgment must happen first in the house of God. Amen. But this message has been going for a long time. A long time. Over 140 years. Over 150 years. And it has not been given with power, not because we don't have powerful speakers, Because the power that's being spoken of here is the power of it that's associated with its imminency. That you have visibility, that everybody can see that something is about to happen, and then people take notice. Most people in this room take notice of Sabbath on what day? On Friday, on the preparation day. Most people don't even have it in their visibility on Sunday, because they know that Friday is the day that they're going to take out to prepare. And so Friday is the day where the Sabbath has power over you. It changes the way you behave. It influences you in a way that it doesn't on the other 5 days of the week. In the same way that the everlasting gospel didn't have the power before this day that it did here. Because people could see that their lives were about to end or start. And it's the same way with the third angel. The same way with the third angel. When the third angel's message is preached, as it should be, power attends its proclamation and it becomes an abiding influence. It must be attended with divine power or it will accomplish nothing. So if you're preaching the third angel's message without divine power, it will accomplish nothing. So if you're wondering why, substantially, our evangelistic campaigns over the last century have not produced the results that it should have done, it's because it hasn't been accompanied by divine power. And the divine power that she's specifically talking about here is in connection with this history. Because as soon as 1798 occurred, what happened in 1798? This angel came down. This angel came down here, and it gave power or influence to the everlasting gospel that had been preached for thousands of years before this. When this angel came down, it gave power. When this angel came down, it too gave an impetus to the message, culminating in the third angel coming down. But this third angel has been running through history, just like this everlasting gospel was running through history, and it hasn't had divine power attending it. But it will do. It will have power attending it when history begins to repeat and these events start occurring again, just like it did here. I'll read the passage and I'll lay this out so that we can understand what's happening. It must be attended with divine power, it will accomplish nothing. I am often referred to the parable of the 10 virgins. So, in connection with this power that's going to attend this third angel, just as the everlasting gospel here was attended by power when the first, second and third angels came down, she's connecting that history with the parable of the 10 virgins. This parable has been and will be fulfilled to the very letter, for it has a special application to this time, and like the third angel's message has been fulfilled and will continue to be present true till the close of time. In the parable, the 10 virgins had lamps, but only 5 of them had the saving oil with which to keep their lamps burning. This represents the condition of the church. The wise and the foolish have their Bibles and are provided with all the means of grace, but many do not appreciate the fact that they must have the heavenly unction. They do not heed the invitation, "Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." When Jesus gave this parable 2,000 years ago, was there a truth that was applicable to the people of his generation?
Yeah.
There was. But the specific application of this was fulfilled in this history here. It was fulfilled in this history, and we don't have the time to go through all the proof of that, but Ellen White refers to this in a number of different passages, that this is the case. We'll read from Great Controversy 393. Great Controversy 393. The coming of Christ, as announced by the first angel's message, was understood to be represented by the coming of the bridegroom. The widespread reformation under the proclamation of his soon coming answered to the going forth of the virgins. So we'll just read that in Matthew 25, verse 1. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins who took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. And Ellen White says here in Great Controversy, the going forth of the virgins is represented by the announcement of the first angel's message. So here, she says this is the beginning of the parable of the 10 virgins. So she's marking the parable of the 10 virgins in a very specific way and attaching them to historical prophetic events. And not any old prophetic events, the everlasting gospel. So she's telling us, just straight from that one small passage, that the parable of the 10 virgins is a story of the everlasting gospel. It's a story of the everlasting gospel. Because when this angel started to be proclaimed, the virgins went out to meet their bridegroom. And how many types of virgins were there? 2 types. The wise and the foolish. 2 classes that we spoke about here. The wise and the foolish. The wise and the wicked. The everlasting gospel always produces 2 classes of people. When they left, could you distinguish between the wise and the foolish? You couldn't. So at the beginning, you can't tell who is wise and who is foolish. Later on, you do. Later on, you do. Summer of 1844. Summer of 1844. Before I read this next statement, I just want to go back in here and just lay some information out here that you may or may not be familiar with. God's people set out on their journey here. 1798, we just read that. They know the bridegroom's going to come in fulfillment of Daniel 8:14, and they set off on their journey. For those of us who aren't familiar with Millerite history, I'll just explain it in a really brief and simple fashion. They had obviously made a mistake. I think most of us know that. There's a mistake in their understanding of how to work out the end date for the 2300 days. And their understanding is that it's going to occur in 1843 and not 1844. Is everybody familiar with that history? Yeah? So when they get to the very last day of 1843, and nothing's happened, they think that Christ isn't going to come and something's gone wrong and their whole world collapses around them, as you'd expect it to. They'd invested so much into this message. When it was found that they'd come to the last point of the last day where they could confidently say that Christ was about to return and he never came, they were very disappointed. Some of us may or may not understand this. We take our years from January to January. Yes? So I'll just draw our years here. So in our calendar, we go from January to December. January to December.
Yeah.
Okay? January to December, January. So that's our years. The Hebrew never used that system. God had given them a different calendar. Their calendar ran from spring to spring. Their calendar ran from spring to spring. So this is ours, and this is the Hebrews. And so the spring is about here, So their calendar ran like this. Can you see that their calendar is out of phase with ours?
Yeah.
Yeah? So their calendar ran from the spring, March, April time. This is when the Hebrew calendar, you can see that in Scripture. Everybody, we've just experienced it a few weeks ago. We just had Easter, didn't we?
Yeah.
And Easter, however pagan or you might make that issue, but we know that that's when the Passover was. Mm-hmm. Yeah? The Passover was on the 14th day of the first month.
Yeah.
2 weeks before that would be the first day of the first month of the Hebrew calendar. And that wasn't anywhere near January.
No.
Yeah? So you know, even yourselves, that the Hebrew calendar, the calendar is different to our calendar. The Millerites recognised this, and when they said that Christ was going to come in 1843, they were not looking at December 1843. They were looking in the spring of 1844. It was in the spring of 1804 that they'd realised that they'd run out of time. They'd run out of time. And we won't turn there, but Habakkuk chapter 2, in Habakkuk chapter 2, it talks about this vision of Daniel, which they are proclaiming. It says, it looks like it's going to tarry. It's been delayed. But in reality, it hasn't been delayed. Had they made the correct calculation to say this in the spring of 1844? They hadn't. We know that because it should have been in the autumn of 1844. We've got there the autumn of 1844. This is the correct and this is the wrong because they've calculated it incorrectly. So what I'm saying here is that when you've got the summer of 1844, just once the spring had occurred, and in this time period here, they had realised that they'd run out of time. So Ellen White's going to comment on this and say this in Early Writings 247. The disappointed ones, you can see why they were disappointed, saw from the Scriptures, Habakkuk chapter 2, that they were in the tarrying time, and that they must patiently wait the fulfilment of the vision. The same evidence which led them to look for their Lord in 1843 led them to expect him in 1844. So here we can mark a waiting time. And Ellen White calls it a tarrying time. And in fact the parable of the virgins here says that they tarry, they waiting. They wait here because Christ hasn't come when they expected him to come. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Does it make sense about this calendation? Why it's a difference? Why it's in 1844, not in January? Because they're using a Hebrew calendation, not the Roman calendar that we use.
Yeah.
Millerites already understood that, and so that's why it's marked here. And now their prophecy has come to an end, nothing's worked out, and they have to wait until further light happens. And you know what happened when they started to wait here and everything had failed? Guess what people started doing? They started mocking them and ridiculing them. If you go back into the history, you can see some of the sneering that went on. In fact, this sneering and this scoffing is a mark or a waymark in prophetic history. You can see in the Scriptures that this mocking occurs. So they mocked God's people and they begin to persecute them. And then the Millerites, realising what was going on, proclaimed the second angel's message here. And they said to their people, because of what's happening, these churches, these Protestant American churches, have now fallen. Babylon has fallen. And they told the Millerite followers to separate from these Babylonish fallen churches. So this is marking here that the Protestant churches in America fell, and it fell when this angel made his proclamation because of this tarrying time that had occurred. So that's an important waymark for us to understand. If we read on in the story of Matthew 25, we read verse 5, which we didn't read it, but it said, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. So during this time period now, they begin to fall asleep. And verse 6, and at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. So I want to mark here the midnight cry. If you've read Spirit of Prophecy, you're familiar with that term. She uses the midnight cry quite frequently and refers back to this history and also to the parable of the 10 virgins. So we're going to read Early Writings 238. Early Writings 238. And this here occurs in August 1844. Near the close of the second angel's message, there's the second angel's message, and then coming down to the close of it. This is August, and this is October. They're coming to the close of the second angel's message. Near the close of the second angel's message, I saw a great light from heaven shining upon the people of God. The rays of this light seemed bright as the sun, and I heard the voices of angels crying, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. This was the midnight cry, which was to give power to the second angel's message. So there are angels coming down here. And how is she defined when these angels come down? What happens? These angels give power to this angel. So can we see that principle? That when you have an angel coming down, it gives power to an existing message. Yeah? So from 1844, we've only got the third angel running through history. And it needs another angel to come down from heaven to give it power. Angels sent from heaven to arouse the discouraged ones and prepare them for the great work before them. What was the great work before them? To enter into the most holy place at the beginning of the judgment. The judgment is opening. The most learned, the most talented men were not the first to receive the message. Angels were sent to the humble, devoted ones, and constrain them to raise the cry, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And it might have slipped you, but I'm just going to read it back again. This was the midnight cry, which was to give power to the second angel's message. This is a message. This latter rain, this refreshing, this rest, this line upon line is a message. All of these are messages. And then finally, great controversy, 427, October 22nd, 1844. The proclamation, behold, the bridegroom cometh in the summer of 1844. There's thousands to expect the immediate advent of the Lord. At the appointed time, the bridegroom came, not to the earth, as the people expected, but to the Ancient of Days in heaven, to the marriage, the reception of his kingdom. They that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. So, Ellen White, in a quite detailed fashion and very specifically, has tied in the everlasting gospel with specific historical prophetic events and has imprinted over that the parable of the 10 virgins. The parable of the 10 virgins. And she says that this parable will be fulfilled to the very letter in the future. So if this message is going to be fulfilled to the very letter in the future, how is it to be fulfilled? Because when we read this as God's people today, for those of us who haven't experienced the first and second angel's messages and are still anticipating the third, we read this on a personal level or in a moral level or in a historical understanding, and it doesn't have any relevance to us as a corporate body. And when I mean as a corporate body, I mean as a historical prophetic event. Because we can see clearly that the way Ellen White is using that parable in this history is in a historical prophetic corporate way. That you have to go through these steps. Do you imagine that in these Protestant churches that they weren't faithful Christians in those churches? Do you think there weren't any faithful Christians in those churches? There must have been.
Yeah.
There must have been. But because they remained where they were and wouldn't heed the call of the second angel, what happens to them? They end up with the pronouncement that they are fallen because they remain where they are. If you struggle with that, I refer you back to this, where we all know that when the Sunday law occurs, no matter how good a person you are, whether you don't lie, don't commit adultery, don't steal, you will still be lost if you don't worship on Sabbath and don't receive the mark of the beast. It's exactly the same principle here. If you're not part of the Millerite movement and walking in the present truth, the light that God has shown His people that has power attending to it, if you don't acknowledge that you're one of those virgins who have walked out and you remain where you are, then you become part of a fallen, broken system. Just as it happened here in 1798. Many people in this history here, in these 46 years, outright refused to accept what William Miller and his associates were teaching. They would not accept it. They came up with argument after argument to show how it just could not be true, what he was saying. And they fought tooth and nail against him. And some of those men, if you investigated their personal lives, they were righteous men. The everlasting gospel is more than your personal walk. Above all the people on the earth, we should understand that. Yet we don't teach that. We don't even believe it. Except when it comes to this. Except when it comes to this. Then we believe it. But if a man stands up with a solemn message and says, by the way, if you only accept a part of it, you'll be part of none of it. And you need to accept these. And you rise up in challenge against that, just like these men did. The door closes on you, right here. The door closes on you. Whether you're in the world, whether you're in another church, or whether you're in God's denominated people, you have to accept the everlasting gospel and see how it's moving through history. So I'm hoping that for those of us who aren't familiar with these things, that it's been reasonably clear enough about how Millerite history has the first, second and third angel messages imprinted into it. They were related to events that occurred, not just experiences or emotions that people were having. That by your behaviour, where you put your body, where you sat, who you associated with, what you did, would determine which side you would fall on, righteous or fallen. And that in the summer of 1844, the United States Protestant churches received a moral fall. And it says that fall was only partial. I'm going to explain that in a minute. But before that, I just want to put another waymark in here. One of the most significant events that occurred in this history occurred in August 1840. That occurred in August 1840. Before I do that, I'll work on this board. I want to just lay something out. This is 1798. This is 1844. 22nd of October. This is 19th of April, 1844. This is the second angel's message, the first angel's message, and the third angel's message. This is the midnight cry. And this is the second angel's message, and I'm going to put an E by it to infer that there was a power, it was empowered. Okay, the second angel was empowered here, we read that. And we're going to mark another one here, which is the 11th of August of 1840. Up to this date here, what's being preached in Christendom? The everlasting gospel. It has to be, because that's the message of salvation. The everlasting gospel is being preached, but it's not being preached with power. The reason it's not being preached with power is because another angel has not come down to empower the message. So this angel comes down in 1798, the first angel's message, and it empowers the everlasting gospel. And what is the power that it gives to the everlasting gospel? It's the power of time. Here, time is introduced. And what do I mean by time? Daniel 8:14. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. That was preached over 150 years ago. If you go on the internet and you see what all the other people talk about the 2,300 days and what foolishness the other denominations speak about what the 2,300 days represents, it's a wonder. It's a wonder with all the light in God's word that people would come up with these foolish conclusions about what that all means. But we as God people understand what it means. We understand about calendars. We understand how calendars work. We understand how a solar year works. We understand how long a month is. We understand how many months there are in a year. And the most important thing we understand is this. That in the Bible, one day equals what? 1 year. 1 day equals 1 year. And that is what gave this message power. The understanding that a day equals a year. A day equals a year. It was the time that gave this message power. Because now, once you have the start date, 457 BC, you can calculate when Christ is about to return in the autumn of October 1844. The cleansing of the sanctuary is going to occur there. And that gave power to this message. We read earlier, actually we didn't read, I mentioned it, but you can find it in scripture. Upon the testimony of two, a thing is established. And I gave you 3 testimonies of how the everlasting gospels work. Remember that?
Yeah.
How many testimonies, according to this, have we got that this is true? 1. You've only got 1 testimony. You've got a man standing up and saying, I think that 2,300 days means 2,300 years. And I think that it starts in 457, and I think that it's going to end in 1844. William Miller is doing a lot of thinking, isn't he? Can he substantiate or prove anything? No. Because nothing has happened. He's got a date that went back here, 457, and he's saying it's going to end in 1844, according to 2,300 years, because he's taking day for year. And can he prove it? No. So the question is, or the rhetorical statement is, prove it to be correct. And he can't. But God has a solution for his problem. Because in 1840, there was a prophecy given in Revelation chapter 9 about Islam. There was a prophecy about Islam in Revelation chapter 9 which showed that an event was going to occur exactly on August 11th in 1844. Sorry, 1814. Thank you. And what that event was the following. Two Islamic nations were going to war against each other. Two Islamic nations were warring, Egypt and Turkey. And the aggressor was Egypt, and the Western powers of Europe were going to put a stop to this fight. They were going to go to Egypt and they were going to restrain Egypt. And you can see this prophecy clearly marked out both in the Great Controversy and in Revelation 9. Ellen White explains it really clearly that this was fulfilled here. And the person who did this work was a brother called Josiah Litch. And he used the principle of days for a year. And he prophesied that this event was going to happen just before the event happened. He prophesied. He was a prophet. A messenger of God. I don't mean an inspired prophet. He was prophesying that this restraining of Islam is going to occur. And did it happen? It did. And what principle did he use? Day for a year. Has William Miller's now principle or idea been proved?
Yeah.
Yes. So he proves it. So this angel here, this piece of information here occurs to prove or to confirm that this message is correct. And as we put here that the second angel was empowered or confirmed, we too can put here that the first angel was empowered or confirmed or shown to be true. And what showed it to be true? What showed it to be true? The restraining of Islam. And this isn't any old Islam. This is not an Islamic country or a state. This is radical Islam. This is not a statement about Islam as a faith, Islam as a nation. This is radical Islam, who are on a war path to overtake the world, and they were restrained at this date, and that empowered this message because it proved that day for a year was correct. And if you didn't accept this, when the second angel message comes, you're not going to accept that. And when the midnight cry happens, you're not going to accept that. And when you get to 1844, October 22nd, the doors shut on you according to parable of the 10 virgins. And Ellen White commented on that, says what? The people were left outside, viewing with their right sight to heaven, praying in the holy place. And who's in the holy place then?
Satan.
She says Satan is. Obscuring their spiritual vision of what was right and what was wrong. However nice people they were. This is not an accusation about an individual's salvation. We're talking about the everlasting gospel, how we're required to see what's happening and walk in step with God. We've already said, right here, the Protestant churches fell. I've got the summer of 1844 here, but I put the date where we mark that as being April 19, 1844. We mark that because this date here, where I've got the spring of 1844, the actual date is the 19th of April. We know the date. It's given in the Pioneer writings. So here, the second angel's message arrives, and Babylon has fallen. The United States churches have come to at least the first stage of their end. The first stage of their end. And Ellen White says it was a moral fall. What is the everlasting gospel? It's a three-step testing process. It's a three-step testing process. The people in this history here, if here you fall, that means you're finished. let's lay this out. In this history here, you've got two groups of people. One of them we're going to call the Protestants. In fact, all of these are the Protestants. One of them I'm going to call Protestants, and the other one I'm going to call Millerites. And they come to the first angel, and the first angel says, "You're a sinner." And these Protestants do not accept the message, they reject it. So they say, "No." And they say, "Yes." When they get to this stage here, then these people are going to begin to fall because they said no. And these people are going to begin to rise and say yes. And by the time you get to here, these people have passed. And what's happened to these people? They've fallen. They're out of the race. So now, you have the Millerites. You have the Millerites. What happens in the parable of the 10 virgins at the midnight cry? The wise and the foolish separate. The wise and the foolish separate. And by the time you get to the end of the parable, the door's shut, the wise are on the inside, and the foolish are on the outside. The Millerites are going to start running through history. And you're going to have the wise, and you're going to have the foolish. And the wise say yes, and the foolish say no. They're going to be going down, and they're going to be going up. You can see, really simply, in this basic graphical representation of how the everlasting gospel works. God says you're a sinner, you need to repent. You accept the message, you pass the test. The Millerites had to go through two tests. One test, two tests. Two tests they had to go through. When Christ came to earth, how many times did he clean the temple? Twice. He didn't clean it twice because he felt like it. He was fulfilling prophecy. You'll see the temple being cleansed. And who is the temple of God? The churches, we are. You see the temple being cleansed twice. One cleansing, two cleansings. It's always the earmark of the everlasting gospel that you'll see these two temple cleansings. At the end of the world, how many times is God going to clean this world up? In how many steps? First the church, then the world. You're going to see these two steps over and over again. So this is how this everlasting gospel works here. I want to deal with this. Let's quickly deal with this. Before I deal with it, what I want to say to you is that for those of you who are not familiar with this message and it's starting to get maybe a bit complicated, I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can without giving too much detail because people can get confused. So if you're struggling with some of this, please come and talk to me during the break, and I'll try and go through it again with you. But hopefully I've kept this as simple as I possibly can so that you can, if you're not familiar with it, it's easy for you to understand. And if you are familiar with it, it's revision. Let's look at the Protestant churches. I'm not going to go through some of this information how to prove it. In the scriptures, when you see animals or beasts, they represent kingdoms and nations. All of us are familiar with Daniel chapter 2, the head of gold, the body of silver, brass, etc. Daniel chapter 7, you have a lion, you have a bear, you have a leopard, you have an iron beast. We're all familiar with that. In Daniel chapter 7, if you remember, how many heads does the leopard have? It has 4. So, do you know why it has 4? I'm asking rhetorically because I'll answer the question, it's not a test. It has 4 heads because it's representing that Greece fragmented into 4 elements. the 4 generals of Alexander the Great. So these heads actually represent something about the kingdom. Then we know that as you run through Daniel 7, that the 4th beast, the iron beast, has 10 horns on its head. And it says 3 of them are plucked up, and then 7 remain. And we will understand what that is talking about, that those horns are representative of kingdoms or nations or powers. Yeah? So when you see a head or a horn on a beast in Scripture, it's figuratively or symbolically talking about a kingdom or a nation or a power. Can everybody see that?
Yeah. Daniel 7, it's 4 wings. It says about Greece, it said it had 4 wings. Leopard which had on the back of it 4 wings of a fowl.
Thank you.
The beast that had also 4 heads.
Okay, so it does say 4 heads there. Okay. When you go to Revelation 13, I'm not going to go through the verses because we're all familiar with this, I assume, I hope. In Revelation 13, you see a beast coming up out of the earth, and it says it's lamb-like. And how many horns does it have? It has 2 horns. Ellen White commented on these horns. We know that those horns represent power. 2 separate powers that this beast has, just as it has in all the other beasts. And Ellen White says the 2 powers that this beast has are Protestantism and Republicanism. Protestantism and Republicanism. So, what is Protestantism? It's to do with religion, because we know Protestants is a religion. And why they're called Protestants? Because they're protesting Rome. That's where they got that name from. They're protesting Rome. Everybody know that? Yeah? And Republicanism. Republicanism is to do with government or state. And it's a republic, and in the most basic way to understand a republic is that it's a government that has no king. It has no king. It's government by the people, for the people. So they vote for their leaders, and they can throw the leaders off their throne because they don't have a king. Who's in charge of a republic? The people are. And we know the strength of America is the separation of church and state. So it has 2 powers. The first power, we said, was Protestantism. As God's people, we haven't had clarity, we haven't understood how America is going to be brought down by the papacy. We have been under the misunderstanding that America will fall. I was going to put it here, but I rubbed it out. At the National Sunday Law. It falls at the National Sunday Law. That's when we think America is going to fall. But we're seeing here, really simply, when did America begin to fall? Over 150 years ago. And what fell? What was the pronouncement that was falling here? It says it was the United States Protestant churches that fell. So we can mark that those 2 horns of the beast of Revelation 13, one of them marking Protestantism, one of them marking Republicanism, church and state, that the Church of America fell in 1844. I'm going to mark it here with a horn. The Protestant churches of America fell in 1844, specifically from 19th of April 1844, but the message was given, as we read, in the summer of 1844. That's when the Protestant churches fall. If we see that this is the everlasting gospel, and it is, at what angel, at what waymark does America, its first horn, fall? At what waymark does it fall? It says it shows up straight on the board. At what number? At the second angel. God's people are expecting America to fall at the third angel when the Sunday law comes. We've already seen historically and prophetically, that the first horn fell at the second. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to work out when the second horn will fall. I don't mean the date or the event, I mean at what waymark will it fall. It won't fall at the third, it will fall at the second. And the second occurs before the Sunday law. America's complete and utter fall happens before the national Sunday law. So if you're looking for America to fall, and you're waiting for that to happen at the Sunday law, you need somebody who has experience on the first and second angel's message, which you haven't had. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense at all. I'm just stating it as Ellen White stated it. You need to be shown when America fell, because it didn't fall when you expected it to. Without going too far into it, America has already fallen. The second angel's message has already arrived when you weren't looking, when you didn't even realise, because you never had any experience in it. And if you're waiting it to be a future event, what you're doing is you are only accepting a part of the message. And if you accept part of the message, you're going to be part of none of it. So you have to see when America fell and accept that through your own personal study. I don't mean accept it because I said it. I mean that you can see that that is the case, because history is repeating. It repeats in a specific order because it's the everlasting gospel. Everlasting means it's always been there, it always will. It doesn't change. So, in our next and final study, we're going to just develop this idea here. We're going to bring this history into our history. We've already got the license to do that, because Ellen White says the parable of the 10 virgins was fulfilled and will be fulfilled to the very letter. We've already seen where the first horn of the United States fell in the summer of 1844. And we're still expecting it to do something in the future. It's already happened. We've shown you how the everlasting gospel works. It's a three-step testing process. And the churches in the United States had their first fall here in the summer of 1844. And the White says it was only a partial fall, but the complete fall is yet future. And as we investigate that, we're going to see where we get the prophetic license to get all of this history and drag it into the future. Where did we take all of these numbers from? We took them from Revelation chapter 14. Remember that? We took it from Revelation chapter 14. So, just so that we're going to make a start into this, and I'm going to bring it, we'll develop it in the last presentation after lunch. Let's go to the book of Revelation. You're all familiar with this. Let's go to Revelation chapter 18. And as soon as I've just said that, hopefully your brains have got into order how you're going to now take all of this history and bring it into the future. It's not guesswork. It's not my opinion. It's shown clearly in Scripture. Because Revelation 18, beginning from verse 1, says this: "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory." Verse 2, "And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hole of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird." I'll stop there. We see the message of Revelation 14, the second angel, repeated, don't we? We see it repeated. It's not the same history. It's a new, separate history that's being spoken of. It's a history that's future to Millerite history. And this is what's going to give us the license to get this history and bring it into our history, because this is a future event to them, and this is the complete fulfillment of the second angel's message. Because now it says what? It's about to become what? The cage or a container of every hateful bird. Every hateful bird. Not just some of them, everyone. And what do you know about the story of Noah? when God says, I'm going to bring this world to an end, why did he bring it to the end? Because the thoughts of what? Of men were what? Always evil. They didn't have any good thoughts left, because they had become the containers or the cage of every hateful bird. When does this occur? I'm not asking for the day, I'm asking for the waymark. When is it all complete? At the second or the third? It's at the second, it says. And he cried mounting with a strong voice, saying, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. When does Babylon fall? And what message? The first, second, or third? It's at the second. So this complete fall happens when? At the second. Yeah. Babylon has now fully got everybody in its cage, and they're all evil continually. And it doesn't happen at the third. So you don't need me to work it out for you. That when we bring this history here, and Ellen White says it wasn't the complete fulfillment, it was partial, the complete fulfillment will be when? In Revelation 18, verses 2 and 3, which is before number 3, the third waymark, which is before the Sunday launch. Is that easy to see?
Yeah.
Is that easy to see?
Yeah.
Babylon is completely evil. It's got everything. All the hateful birds are now there before the third angel arrives, before the Sunday law arrives. So if you're looking for something to happen in the future, you're looking in the wrong direction, because it's already happened. And Protestant America already got taken captive, its churches did, its religion did, in the summer of 1844. So America is going to be part of this thing. So America will fall at the second angel, not the third. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask for continued clarity and discernment to know whether the messages that are being presented here are in agreement and accordance with your word. Lord, I pray that you would be with each of my brothers and sisters here, even with the children. Lord, may these thoughts, these ideas, which are complicated beyond our own human wisdom, be spoken of, contemplated in as simple a way as possible, so that even the babes in Christ can understand what's being discussed. Please be with us. Help us to continue to reverence you during our lunch break. May we not become beguiled and lose the precious truth that you're trying to teach your children during these sacred hours today. A special time that we've come apart to study your word in a special way, Lord. This holy convocation that you've allowed us to come to. Be with us and guide us. May we not be like the stony ground hearers, Lord, who, because of the worries and perplexities of the food and the various issues of life, lose the blessing and don't endure. Be with us and bless us and guide us now, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.